Welcome to our session of investigating and exploring life through the lens of the cross-cutting concepts, one of the breakout sessions of the STEAMpower Conference, presented by the Expanded Learning Division of San Diego County Office of Education. My name is Chelsea Cochran. I am a science coordinator at the San Diego County Office of Education. I did include my contact information there should you need or want to get a hold of me after today's session. So thank you for choosing the session. It is interactive, so feel free to leave your cameras on and join us in the chat interactions as well. Just to make sure that everyone's in the right place, I did include the session description here. We'll be looking at focusing on at home and in your neighborhood type science and STEAM activities that can engage students in sense making in the world around them. So thank you for joining us today. A quick introduction to the cross-cutting concepts and using them to develop a scientific habit of mind. The cross-cutting concepts are one of the 3 dimensions of the next generation science standards. And so by zooming into one of the dimensions today, we're able to look at how to encourage students to make sense of the world that they live in. And if you are new to the next generation science standards, the cross-cutting concepts, again, are one of the 3 dimensions. There are 7 different cross-cutting concepts visually shown here on the screen. They can be grouped into 3 categories: patterns, causality, and systems. So as we go through today's session, we'll be zooming into each of those to get a deeper look into what the cross-cutting concepts are and how we can use them to support student sense-making of scientific phenomena and use them as a lens to critique and evaluate engineering design projects. So the first thing I'd like you to do is to think about the prior knowledge that you have around systems. So we're going to choose one of the cross-cutting concepts and kind of zoom in to the systems and systems models for a moment. And use the chat feature in Zoom to type your response to one or both of these questions. So the first question is, what is a system? And the second question are, what are some examples you can think of? So I'll give you a couple minutes to start typing away. Have a few others coming in, a set of things working together. Some examples might be the human body, a school district, a city. They all have different parts that work together. All right, so I'll encourage you at the different parts of our breakout here to use the chat. We do have a small enough group right now where if you prefer to unmute and share that way, you're more than welcome to do so. If you'd like to give us a heads up that you are going to share, you can just type an H in the chat and we'll know that means kind of that you're raising your hand, or you can use the reaction buttons of Zoom to actually show us the little hand icon. That works as well. I do have my colleague John Spiegel here monitoring the chat and participating as well. So please make sure that you interact with us either verbally and or in writing using the chat. So thanks so much for that prior knowledge dip. We're going to take a little gander into the systems and systems model cross-cutting concept and come back a couple different times and review this idea of what is a system and what are some examples. So the paper and pen or pencil that you had nearby, I'd like you to go ahead and make a T-chart on that paper and label those 2 columns system, not a system. And there's a couple different ways that you can interact with this. I'm going to share with you the next slide, some images, and then at the end of this session, there'll be a link to the slide deck from today's presentation, where if you are interacting with students right now and leading learning with them, you could actually use this activity and choose the slides out of this slide deck to lead the same activity with students. So you're going to look at each picture and decide, is it a system or is it not? And sort them into those 2 categories. And then kind of be ready to explain your thinking. How did you decide whether something was a system or not a system? So slide 8 here is going to give us about 14 different objects. Sorry about that. There we go. That's the next slide. So here are all the images that you're going to look at. And for example, the first one is an aquarium. So you're going to decide, is an aquarium a system or not a system? And go ahead and write that on your T-chart. And then go ahead and look at each of the other images there and jot down your thoughts. A system or not a system? All right, then I'm going to ask John to create, let's go with 2 breakout rooms, do groups of 4 or 5. And we're going to go, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment. We're going to go in breakout rooms for just about 4 or 5 minutes and share which items did you put in your T-chart under systems or not a systems. And then we'll come back together as a whole group and discuss what we found. So enjoy your time in the breakout rooms. Welcome back, everybody. Good to see you. Hope you had a great discussion in your breakout room. We're going to take a couple minutes now to allow you with the small, capitalize on our small group size here and let you guys unmute and share what you guys discussed. Which ones do you think were super easy and you all agreed was definitely a system?
Well, we all agree, like, inside of our body, like the picture where you have like that's a system. There was one with the lamp, the system, the earth was a system, the aquarium was a system, the phone was a system. So, all the components that make a phone work at the same time. The foot web. Is there anything I missed? There are a lot of things.
Great, thanks for getting us started, Mr. Guerrero. Appreciate that. Anybody want to add to what he started for us? What was your thinking? Which ones were super easy to identify, or which ones maybe did your team or breakout room discuss and had a difficulty placing in a category?
Well, Sarah and I were talking about how it seemed like it was, most of them were a system, but then we started talking about the sand, the pile of sand, and how typically we don't think that is a system, but each sand has its own unique parts and, to make the pile of sand. So yeah, so that's where we left off, right, Sarah? Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, it depends on when we look at the cross-cutting concepts. We're talking about systems and systems models, but sometimes the cross-cutting concepts come nicely and together. There's one of the other cross-cutting concepts is scale, proportion, and quantity. So sometimes it depends on what scale you're looking at. Like you mentioned, one little grain of sand, or the quantity of how many would come together to make a system. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again, and we'll get back into the presentation to talk about some of these qualifications and parameters around systems. And thank you so much for taking the time to share out loud. We really appreciate that. So when we think of systems from a science lens, this definition is a working definition for the next generation science standards, that a system is anything that consists of interacting components within a boundary. Systems can be super simple, like a simple beach ball or a stapler, or a very complex, like an ecosystem. And so if we look at that ball for a minute and we think of how in the world is that a system? If you bought one at the store, it would not have air inside and it wouldn't be able to do anything until it did. So the fact that just the plastic outer area of the ball plus the air inside makes that a very simple system. When those two components interact, the ball then can perform its function. In order for that system to work, it has to have an interaction with something outside of the system, in this case, either a person blowing air into the beach ball or a pump to pump air into it. Stapler has certain components and parts that when they work together, they perform the function of hopefully holding your pieces of paper together. And then the complex interactions of ecosystems as well. So let's take one example and look at systems and systems models from the science lens of how we can think about and maybe better position this idea of what is a system for students. Like Jeanette mentioned, sometimes it depends on what we're looking at and how we're interacting with that. So the example here is a video game system. I keep saying maybe I need to update this with a new PS5, which is the newest game system, but the PS4 here, if we think of that as the system under study, we can think of the system boundary as the box that the system comes in when we go buy it. And here in this picture, you can see all the different components that were taken out of the box and laid on the table, included the console, the controller, and the cords. And all of these components are put together in such a way that they're able to interact and the system is able to function. But playing with the PS4 with just the items that come in the box wouldn't be much fun if it didn't have outside components to interact with. So go ahead and use the chat or unmute yourself and let us know what other components or parts might this system need to interact with in order for us to be able to play a video game. Yeah, definitely a TV, right? If we can't watch what we're playing, it might not be very fun. TV, fingers, yeah, we need a human to play. Usually they're even more interactive and fun if we have multiple humans that are playing. Some games, yeah, definitely either a digital download of a game or back in the PS4 days, a disc to put in the machine to play the game. Yeah, great one. Power and electricity. Yeah, it'd be hard to have all that just sitting there and not be able to plug it in to power the system. Yeah, battery, electricity, internet connection. That's a new one, right? Maybe 5-6 years ago, that might not have been as prevalent, but now if you want to be able to play with people across the world, internet connection allows you to do so. A lot of our schools are starting to offer esports where kids don't have to travel to play against each other. They can all play at their home school, or right now, even during everybody working and learning from home, can play from their own home on teams that maybe they've never even met the individuals that they're playing with and or against. So very good. Components outside the system. So just showing that even when we look at a system, like Jeanette mentioned, the pile of sand, by itself, it might be really hard to say, is this a system? But when we think of how that sand might be, have forces on it from outside of that pile of sand, then we may move it from the not a system to a system column. But what's important from this definition that we shared about let me go back to it real quick, the system, is that it's within a boundary. So in science, it's important that when we discuss systems that we all have come to agreement on what our boundary is, or it's hard for us to have conversations about how the system is operating, whether it's an interaction with components within the system, like with our PS4 analogy of, was it something that interacted that came within the box, or was it one of those other features or components that you guys typed in the chat about an outside influence acting on the system? So look back at the images you sorted at your T-chart, and after that kind of walk through a system of the PS4 analogy and thinking about how other components might interact that are outside of the boundary, if there's any that you would want to change, or if you have any new thoughts about the items that you classified into system or not a system. And you can use the chat, or again, unmute yourself if you'd like to share out loud, but which ones would you like to change?
Maybe like the pile of dirt for me, because I put that on not a system. But now that I think it was Jeanette, right? She said like there's different things inside that pile that make it a thing, you know. And yeah, the little pebbles, the sand, dirt, like make a work together to make a pile of dirt. So that my mind a little bit, because you start thinking about what can really be a system and what can you use to create a thing.
Definitely. Well, one of the reasons that we like to model with this activity is the idea that you're right. Anything, if you could put anything in the system column, but it's more about how you, or in this case, your students, would talk about their rationale for why it's a system, where they're drawing the boundary, what interactions they're talking about, is much more important than did they put the system in the right column or not. And so this is a great one of being able to have all students enter into a sense-making activity around the cross-cutting concepts of system. And it's not important that they, argue or wait until the teacher gives them the right answers, but rather it's about their justification for yes or no, or system, not a system, and the why behind that decision than it is whether or not there was a correct decision. So there isn't really a right answer with this card set. When you get the presentation, there is a link in the notes section of that slide where you could PDF where you could print out those pictures if you are meeting with students in person, and they could actually sort the cards pretty quick into system, not a system, and then you could have them resort the actual cards themselves. So know that this presentation itself can be a resource to you. You can copy and paste those the slides around the systems section for students, and or use the PDF printout to do that in person if you are meeting with students currently or know that you will be in the near future. It's kind of a nice one of the activities that can be done with multi-age students. And then the disciplinary core ideas of the next generation standards are grade level specific. However, the cross-cutting concepts and the science and engineering practices are by grade band, K2, 3, 5, 6, 8, and 9, 12. So leaning into the cross-cutting concepts like we're modeling today is a great opportunity if you're working with mixed age groups for students to be able to still engage in scientific thinking collaboratively together. So now what we're gonna do is give you a chance to get up out of your seat, and we're gonna give you 60 seconds. This is a minute to win it timer. And you're going to either grab something at your home or scroll through your phone if you don't wanna get up. But in 60 seconds, you're gonna need to show us something that based on your definition is a system, and then be able to tell us why that item is a system. Okay, so I'm gonna start our minute to win it timer. You're gonna get up, go grab an item, come back ready to share it with us in 60 seconds. Whoop. There we go.
The game begins in 3, 2, 1.
All right, so there's our minute to win it timer. Those are also embedded in the presentation. So even if you don't want to copy and paste it in this presentation or use this one, you're more than welcome to grab those timers. They're all free from YouTube. So a little teacher tip along the way as well. So go ahead on the count of 3. We'll hold up our items if you have one available. 1, 2, 3. What did you grab? Right. Very curious about those. Very cool. All right, so if you're in a place where you cannot unmute or turn on your camera, feel free to share with us in the chat. But I would love to have 1 or 2 people that haven't shared yet today. If you'd like to unmute and share, I see, looks like an apple, some Legos, a vacuum, some tape, a couple people. It's like another whole game of did you get the same system somebody else did? Is there anyone that would like to unmute and talk about their system? It's like a water bottle too. Jeanette has nominated Sarah in the chat to share about her vacuum, I believe was what I saw you holding up. You mind, Sarah?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
And what made you choose vacuum as your
Because
presentation?
I am in my my room, and I I was looking for an item, and I saw this vacuum cleaner, and I believe it has some different parts, and there is connection between these parts, and the whole of these component makes a body for cleaning. And yeah, and the whole of them help to make a function. So it definitely should be a system, I think so. Yeah.
Definitely, I would say you gave a great explanation of the parts that work together to perform the function of cleaning. Great job, Sarah.
Thank you. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Jeanette, for welcoming another voice into our space. I appreciate that. All right, so what I wanted to share with you too, we don't have time in a short session to go through them, but I wanted this presentation to be a resource to you guys after today. So this link here takes you to a folder where we have created some student-facing activities where they can further explore systems. So they're broken down usually by the K2, 3, 5, 6, 8, and 9, 12 grade span for you. And all of those activities should be available in Google for you to make a copy of and use directly with students if you'd like. This folder, they are created as a means to print out and share directly with students. But if you're doing things virtually, you could share the Google Doc with them or copy and paste the text from the Google Doc into a Google presentation, however you're currently able to interact with your students. So know that folder of resources, the county office science team created those early on in our work at home and learn from home situation with COVID-19 to support student exploration in their own home and or right outside their own front door. But if you are fortunate enough to be welcoming students back to your expanded learning programs on sites as well, these would definitely be something that could be done with keeping social distancing in mind in a in-person learning situation as well. So now we kind of get to pause and look into the kind of theory and research behind the cross-cutting concepts and why they're so important for students. And so we did just want to ground that, and again, mentioning that when you are highlighting a cross-cutting concept and having students think through the lens of a cross-cutting concepts, these activities are aligned to standards, the next generation science standards. And so Dimension 2 in the California Science Framework is all about the cross-cutting concepts. I have linked to a more in-depth reading there if you are interested, but really the 4 takeaways from this section of the California Science Framework are that the cross-cutting concepts cut across all disciplines of science and engineering. So they're useful no matter what students are studying. By focusing on the cross-cutting concepts in your expanded learning and before and after school programs, it will support whatever content students are learning in the classroom, regardless of grade level. It allows students to forge connections and amplify their understanding of the other 2 dimensions, the science and engineering practices and the disciplinary core ideas. There are valuable tools that can help students select and use the practices to understand phenomena. And then they also, it's very helpful, just like we didn't just do an activity and not mention that we were talking about systems and systems models. It's really important to be explicit and help students be aware of which cross-cutting concept they're using and experience them in multiple contexts. So a little bit of background around those 3 groupings, the patterns, causality, and systems. So students come to us all great at observing and recognizing patterns. And so we want to leverage that ability and be able to connect our instruction and learning to being able to use the cross-cutting concept of patterns to explain observable phenomena and use them as evidence to not only just identify patterns, but also use them to support creating explanations. And oftentimes we'll notice that phenomena we have students study either during their classroom time or outside is that the phenomena is actually an observable pattern that occurs in nature. For example, clouds often form near the tops of mountains, and trees tend to be smaller at higher elevations. So those are some patterns in nature that we can observe. The causality is essential for science when we look for that cause and effect relationship. Students need to have an explicit understanding and construct explanations about the causes and effects of phenomena, and focusing in on the cross-cutting concepts of cause and effect and structure and function can help students with their scientific reasoning. So those are two more of the cross-cutting concepts: structure and function and cause and effect. And then bringing us back to systems, which is the cross-cutting concept that we dove a little deeper in during our session today, is that this idea, using the idea or concept of systems, provides students a way to analyze information and set those boundaries like we mentioned, and then describe interactions that are occurring within the system between systems. And the systems kind of category includes 4 of the cross-cutting concepts. So there's systems and systems models. There's also scale, proportion, and quantity, which is very helpful in being able to determine the processes that underpin phenomena. When we track matter and energy is another one of the cross-cutting concepts. So when students are tracking matter and energy into and out of systems, it helps them understand the limitations of systems and the possibilities for the system. And then the stability and change is one of the another one of the cross-cutting concepts. And when we look at things of stability and change and the rate of change, that often helps us tell if operations within a system are changing. I look back at that pile of dirt, and if we think of that as like a explanation of some of the dirt we might see or earth we see sitting around on a day-to-day basis, it might look like not much changes, but when we look over geologic time, earth is changing a lot. And so knowing that sometimes it's the scale of which we make our observations to determine whether or not things are stable or changing. So sometimes it's difficult to just make our observations and our thinking around one cross-cutting concept at a time. And that's why that visual of these 3 groupings of patterns, causality, and systems is a way to group those. At the bottom of this slide, again, some resources for after today's session. There's a link using the cross-cutting concepts to build sense making and reasoning. That's another resource from our San Diego County Office of Education, which provides question stems to get students to think through the lenses of each of the cross-cutting concepts. So that will be a very useful tool for you. If you already have activities and things that you're doing with students, you can consult this reference and add a couple different questions to have students not only just do a fun science activity, but really grounded in the standards and have students be able to engage in sense making as well. And then if you like these visuals that you see here, the 7 different icons, those are available for a free download. So you can use them in presentations similar to this if you're teaching digitally and you want students to have a visual cue as to which cross-cutting concept they're thinking through. They're also available to print as posters. So again, if you are seeing students in person, that would be a nice resource to be able to have as well. A couple additional resources that we wanted to provide that are outside of our San Diego County Office of Education resources, but ones that we lean on ourselves quite frequently. The first one is Science Snacks. It's brought to you by a museum in Northern California called the Exploratorium. And the second link underneath there, using Science Snacks cross-cutting concept, is a document we put together. There's over 100 science snacks published on the Exploratorium website that are hands-on activities that you can either do as a demonstration virtually and or have students engage in. Most of them are using very simple materials found at home or in most schools. And then the link underneath there, the using snacks cross-cutting concept, is where we spent the time looking through each of those science snacks and correlated many of them to the different cross-cutting concepts that they could be used to highlight and have students think through while engaging in that task. And then the Wonder of Science website is a website created by Paul Anderson, who has put together a lot of great NGSS resources. And the Wonder of Science is his newest website that he has created this year. And to highlight the cross-cutting concepts, he does have a page where he has a mini lesson for each of the 7 cross-cutting concepts that would be great if you're looking to, just like today's session, hopefully gave you some additional background around systems and systems models. There's a mini lesson there for all 7 that could help you understand and unpack the additional cross-cutting concepts. And so what we're going to ask for you today, we have a little reflection for you. If you can help us out and just type your responses in the Zoom, we would love it, of Zoom chat. What have you learned about the cross-cutting concepts today? If you can type that in the chat for us, or if you have a question related to the cross-cutting concepts, we would love to hear those as well. So I'm going to stop talking for just a second and give you a chance to think and type in the chat for us. Thanks for getting us started, Mr. Guerrero. Glad to hear you've got some things you can use to forge connections. That's super important. Getting kids talking and making sense of science is a great way to have them connect on a personal level while also engaged in learning. So I appreciate that. Helpful for a mixed age group. All right, the chat remains open for anyone else that wants to add to Mr. Guerrero's reflection. We'd love to hear from you if you're still typing. Appreciate that. For the sake of making sure that we end on time and give you an opportunity to access resources from our session, I did want to go into our closing slide there. John has put the link to our presentation in the chat for you, and the workshop evaluation. John, if you could place that one there, that would be perfect as well. Remember, the STEAMpower Conference is asking after each session that you complete the workshop evaluation. So we would really appreciate your feedback, and give you the last couple minutes of our session to get started on that now would be great. So it's 1:47. We'll stay on the line till 1:50 or a few minutes after if you need anything or have any questions. Otherwise, we invite you to make sure to click on the links in the chat now so that you have the link to today's presentation saved, as well as get started on your workshop evaluation. So thank you very much. It's been great spending our time with you today. And our contact, you see our contact information on that screen as well. I know it's hard in 45, 50 minutes to get all the support you might need. So continue to reach out to us after today's session if you have questions. And Lisa just put a reminder in the chat, if you're not following along with the chat, that the raffle today, if you complete the workshop evaluation, you'll be entered into a raffle. So definitely make sure that you get an opportunity to be a winner today. All right, for those of you still with us, it is 1:50. So to give you ample time to get to your next session, if you would like to leave this meeting to be able to click on your next link, that would be great. And or if you have questions for us, feel free to unmute and ask away. Thanks again for your time this afternoon. We really appreciate it.